currently in the waiting room, and they will be making their way to our hall in 2 minutes. So please kindly get ready in order to stand up and welcome them through a big applause. Thank you very much. Welcome the Deputy Prime Minister and our guest of honor. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies
Thank you. Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Giorgio, Honorable Suhyara, Honorable Hamwandi, distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for RUPP and ISPP to host a lecture by Honorable Giorgio, a renowned diplomat, on the topic of threats and opportunities for small countries in a multipolar world, with a specific focus on Cambodia's past experience and recent developments. Before we delve into the lecture, allow me to provide a brief background on international world order leading to a multipolar world. Throughout history, the global order has undergone profound transformations, shaping interactions and dynamics among nations. In the aftermath of the World War II, the international system was characterized by a bipolar world order, with the United States and Soviet Union emerging as the two superpowers. The it is with great anticipation that we welcome Honorable George Yu to deliver his lecture on threats and opportunity for small countries in a multipolar world. Honorable George Yu's extensive experience as Singapore's former foreign minister and his involvement in various international organizations make him uniquely qualified to provide insight on the challenges and possibilities that small nations like Cambodia face in the context of evolving global order. Honorable guests and ladies and gentlemen, since the university inceptions in the 1960s, only 3 dignitaries have been awarded, one a doctoral degree and the other 2 honorary doctorate by the Royal University of Phnom Penh. They were, first, the great Supreme Patriarch Chuan Nat, Samdech Chuan Nat, conferred our guiding context. Honorable Giorgio, the floor is yours.
Deputy Prime Minister, Ministers, Excellencies, the President and Director of the Royal University, old friends, new friends, professors, teachers, students. It is a very great honor for me to be invited to give a lecture to you this afternoon. I'm not sure how I deserve this honor, because even though in the very uncomfortable to find Asians and others openly disagreeing with them, not in a rude way, but as equals. They do not want to be judged the way they have been judged for a very long time. Not that the Chinese are about to invade the US, but because they are used to a certain dominance for a very long time. And that dominance is threatened by the Chinese. Not just politically and militarily, but also technologically and ideologically. It used to be widely believed that the only way to the future is the Western European American way, that we must walk path. It was not uncommon in the past, still but less so now, that American and European officials will go around the world. You can almost imagine with a clipboard and giving us a mark. Malaysia 6 upon 10. Singapore 4 upon 10. Cambodia 4 upon 10. Of course, they themselves 10 upon 10. Lee Kuan Yew was a bit fed up about being lectured how Singapore could be better governed. So I remember him telling some visiting American official or senator, he said, make me a 51st state and I will listen to you. So Singapore want to be the 51st state of the US? I'm not so sure. Because even Western systems are running into trouble. They themselves know that they have a problem. That electoral dynamics force them to take short-term view of their own problems. Deficit financing, rate pauses, all kinds of little things become very big because when election contests are intense, you go for marginal votes, which means that you must pander to small group interests, collect enough of them in order to pass 50% and get into power. It's not that they are not aware of this, they are fully aware of this. But they can no longer escape that system. Because this system has gone on for so long, they're almost trapped within it. So when you look at America, and many of us have studied in America, many of us grew up admiring America, seeing it as the light on the hill, and wanting our children to study there, and maybe even to apply for green cards and become Americans. Today, we are not so sure. A system which was such an enormous success, electoral system defined in the US Constitution, which was for so long so admired. Today, they confront two candidates for the coming presidential elections. Joe Biden, who we all know is, if he were our leader here, would be an embarrassment. But which in America they cannot say it because they are not allowed to say it or because it's not proper to say it. And with a candidate, not as old, but just as interesting, Donald Trump. And when Americans meet to them, they hold their hands up in despair. Why are we forced into a choice between these two as our leader? It's not for us to judge America or to point out what we may think are the deficiencies in the system, or in England, or in France, or in Germany. But everyone knows, even though they do not say so publicly, that I was very surprised a few weeks ago when an African leader, the former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, made a speech. Obasanjo was a successful president of Nigeria, and through one of the international advisory boards, got to know Lee Kuan Yew well. And Lee Kuan Yew was invited by him to go to Africa and speak to African leaders. Lee Kuan Yew had gone to Africa in the 60s, but did not feel he had the energy or the interest to go back to Africa, so suggested that Singapore host a meeting for African leaders organized by Obasanjo in Singapore. And they asked me as a young minister to organize it. So I got to know President Obasanjo. He's now maybe in his late 80s, but he gave a speech recently. He said, we all know that Western institutions do not fit Africa. He said, we all know that. But somehow, the institutions which are good for Africa must take into account the history, the culture, the value system of Africans. And throughout Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, tribal affiliations remain very powerful. So in a system of one vote, you vote first for your tribe and then for the country. But such a system does not lead to the ideal democratic outcome. It becomes a game by which different tribes compete to have power, and with that power favor their own tribes. But I was surprised that he came up openly. And I asked myself, why at this ripe old age did he speak up like that? I suspect, I have no proof, but I suspect one reason is because of the rise of China. China openly announces to the world that its system is different, that the road it is on, it doesn't recommend to anybody else, but it is a road for the Chinese people, given their history and their values. What China is telling to the whole world is there are many roads to the future, not just the road prescribed to us by the West. And so African countries are saying, we too, each of us, must find our way to the future. Well, the West feels threatened by this. Because if we were one way to the future, and that way is our way, then it gives them a great advantage in lecturing the whole world, telling them what to do, judging them by their standards. And out of this, political, cultural, economic advantages, which they have long enjoyed, that tide has crested and is beginning to recede. And what we are seeing in the world today, seemingly connected events, like the rivalry between the US and China, like the war in Ukraine, the revolt against the French in West Africa, Hindu nationalism in India, changes in the Middle East, including what MBS is doing to Saudi Arabia. These separate phenomena are not disconnected. They are part of shifting tides in the world. One where the West has receded, leaving the US as unipole with the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, and one in which there are multiple poles emerging. China will be the biggest pole because of its large homogeneous population, but it will not be the only pole because the rest of the world cannot become Chinese. The Chinese do not want the rest of the world to become like Chinese. They find it very difficult to deal with non-Chinese inside China. And that's why they're always building walls around themselves to keep foreigners out, to keep Chinese in times of crisis. Russia, despite tremendous pressure, has shown that it will be its own pole. It will not be absorbed by Western Europe. And in the ability of NATO in Ukraine, there is now a back pressure which is affecting domestic politics in every European country and in the US. Like a kung fu expert who tries to break a wall and the wall doesn't break. All that pressure reverberates, causing internal injury in Western societies. The Chinese don't want to dominate the world because in their history, it is difficult dealing with foreigners. So those of you who have read the remains of the Three Kingdoms, there's a famous story about a southern barbarian and the great strategist Zhuge Liang. He defeated him, captured him, he sued for peace, released him. Then he gave trouble again and again. Zhuge Liang's colleagues said, why don't you just kill him? He said, when we kill him, someone else will take his place. Yeah, but they will occupy his land. He said, there will be even more trouble. So finally, after the 7th or 8th time, capturing, releasing, there was peace and friendship. That's the way the Chinese look at the neighbors. Whereas small countries like Singapore or Cambodia, even Vietnam, understanding how they think is very important. Because we make the wrong assumptions, make the wrong moves, we hurt them, we hurt ourselves. It's lose-lose. China has its own nature. India has its own nature. Yes, the population of India has overtaken that of China. So Xi Jinping happily announced that we are now the second most populous country on earth. He said it in a very relaxed, almost happy way, that I have fewer problems compared to India. But India is not homogeneous. India is one country politically. But from north to south, east to west, they speak different languages, they have different histories, different written scripts, different religions. India, in some ways, is more like Europe. Yes, there is an overarching value system, which is Hinduism, Brahmanism, Buddhism. They share in common, except with Muslims. Otherwise, they are not like China, which is uniquely homogeneous. Can you imagine? China has twice the population of Europe. It's only one literature. It's only one writing system. It's only one set of heroes. So when we deal with China, we have to accept that this is a very different kind of civilization, very hierarchical, because if you don't have central leadership, there'll be civil war. And if there's civil war, it will go on for a very long time, for many generations. If it's a long time, that's just a bad luck. And one of the keys in organizing Chinese society has been the control of water. From the earliest days, they have huge hydraulic projects to transfer water from one place to another. The internal network of canals in China both for irrigation and for transportation, which is not seen anywhere else. When the British were in India, they built irrigation networks in the Indus Basin, the Narmada River and other rivers. But since independence, not much change, because Indian democracy makes centralized decision-making very difficult. The Brahmaputra River, which starts in Tibet, then there's a big curve and turn 90 degrees into the Bay of Bengal. I was reading Abdul Kalam, the former president of India. He said, if you go to Arunachal Pradesh, in flood, you cannot see the opposite bank of the Brahmaputra River. That's how wide it was. The rest of India is dry. Now, if this were China, a long time ago there were big canals to transport water from the northeast to other parts of India. They can't do that. And you can't do that in Europe either. So when we deal with China, we need to understand China. And maybe it's easier for Cambodians to understand China because if we look at Khmer civilization, which is really centered on the Tonle Sap and the Mekong coming together before reaching the delta. So everything depended on water control. With water control, you can have 2-3 crops. You created a surplus to build temples, to have priesthoods, to have a hierarchy. And when I was called the Prime Minister this morning, he was telling me how Cambodia is now giving high attention to agriculture, which is your origin, where it all began. How, because of water control, the Khmer's developed probably the greatest civilization in Southeast Asia. So, but in this, there is a great similarity to China. And we explain why I don't think it's difficult for Khmer people to understand the Chinese, and vice versa. Yes, the religious system came from India. But societally, Cambodia is very different from India. And we know that, and the Indians know that. Even though the mythology, the iconography are similar. India has, since my last visit to Angkor Wat in 1979, they have done wonderful partial restoration of Tapom. And they know iconography better than anybody else. And we naturally want to have good relations with India. But when we deal with India, we must understand that it has a different nature. When we deal with America, we understand its nature. When we deal with Europe, we understand its nature because many of us were educated there. And for some of you here, you probably understand Russia better than most Singaporeans because there was a period when Russia had a lot of influence on Cambodia, and some in the older generation would have spoken Russian fluently. We are now entering a multipolar world. The Ukrainian conflict has no easy solution because the West cannot allow Putin to win, and Putin cannot lose. So there will be a ceasefire, like in the Korean Peninsula, like in Kashmir, like in Cyprus. There is no peace agreement for decades to come, which means a prolonged standoff between the West and Russia, which also means that Russia and China will be close for a long time. And this is remarkable considering the fact that Tsarist Russia, 600,000 square kilometers of land from Qing Dynasty China. And during a period of weakness, Stalin persuaded Mao to let Mongolia be independent, which is another 1.5 million square kilometers. So the Chinese know this. They accept that when you are weak, you lose things. When you are strong, you gain things. So for them, this is a lesson. So you would have expected that leaving it to natural forces, Russia and China cannot have good relations. And the Chinese can't believe how lucky they are that the West, instead of using Russia against China, have pushed Russia to a point where Russia becomes a natural friend of China. China also doesn't want Europe to be too close to America. China supports a strong EU, a strong euro, because they know that the main problem is the US. And if they can create some separation across the Atlantic, that's good for China. And whether we're a big country or a small country, we understand this. We know that dealing with the Europeans is different from dealing with the Americans. So all of us now are learning how to deal with different systems. And that when we're dealing with one big power, the agenda is different from dealing with another big power. When you deal with, you will say, look, your textile privileges, your tariffs, GSP, well, you know, democracy, this issue, that issue. When you deal with the same thing. When you deal with China, these things are not important. You're only talking about interest and mutual security. If you deal with India, again different. This is a good object for small countries. Now, if the world were divided between black and white, then you choose one side or the other. I mean, it's like the churning of the sea of milk. You had an ashram, you had Deva. You have one side or the other. It's clear, simple. But if it's a messy, multipolar world, how do we survive? Is it good for us or is it bad for us? This is something that we have to think through deeply. In recent history, when there was a titanic conflict between the Soviet Union and the US, in the Mekong Delta, the Mekong River was a dividing line. Across that river, B-52 bombers from Utapao bombed Cambodia, bombed Laos, bombed South Vietnam, bombed North Vietnam, and from the Philippines. I remember vividly climbing up the hill behind Rang Tabi, there on top overlooking the city, rusting anti-aircraft guns pointing towards Thailand. I'm not sure whether they were effective. Maybe some were, I don't know. But happily, these are all relics of the past. And I led a trade delegation of ASEAN to the US in 2001. The current Foreign Minister Sokchanda Sopia and Sok Sipana were in the delegation as deputy ministers. And I was trying to explain to the Americans why the map was not a dividing line, but a unique waterway. And I remember using the comparison of the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was harnessed to benefit a number of states in the US. I said, one day the Mekong will become like that, uniting us instead of dividing us. But a huge tragedy before we made that transition. And that was because Mongolia was a divided society. When you are divided, you'll be torn apart. You'll be torn apart because you're relatively small. And the big powers will want to take advantage. In the early 90s, there was a Chinese ambassador in Singapore. I can't remember his name now, but he was China's ambassador to Phnom Penh. He spoke fluent Khmer. So he told me in Chinese, he said, there are divided people. And he shook his head. This was in the early 90s. In other words, this is their tragedy, that they're divided. So the unity that you have in Cambodia today is not only precious, it is life and death. Because there's a new titanic struggle between the US and China. And you do not want to be torn apart again. For Singapore, it's the same thing. We're under pressure like you. Sometimes from China, sometimes from Russia. The Europeans we can more or less ignore, others we can ignore. But China we cannot ignore. The US we cannot ignore. So we spend a lot of our time thinking through how to position ourselves. It cannot be static, because if you are static, you lose stability. It has to be a kind of dynamic stability. But at all times, there must be a core position. It cannot be that when we talk to the US, we agree with them, thinking that the Chinese are not in the room. And then when we're talking to the Chinese, we agree with them, thinking that the US are not in the room. In today's world, there's only one audience, because microphones and cameras are everywhere. So have only one audience, take only one position. Yes, the nuances may be different, but have one position. And Cambodia has been able to strike that balance. From time to time, you're accused of being too pro-China. Then sometimes the Chinese think that you are being too influenced by the US. But the deep instincts here is no. We are pro-Cambodia first. And we do everything in the interest of Cambodia. It's the same with Singapore. And because all small countries face the same tension, small countries should unite, because we can help each other. We seek strength in numbers. If in the UN we take a vote and we are alone, it's very lonely, and we'll get into trouble. But if 100 countries in the UN, because there are more small countries in the UN than big countries, then it's okay, we are the majority. And this is why Singapore has always organized small countries, the form of small states, the 3G countries. Without numbers, it's very difficult for us to defend, to maintain our position. But the most important circle is ASEAN. Because if ASEAN stays united, all of us can hide behind ASEAN. If China pushes us too much, we say, no, this is ASEAN's position. If the US says this and that, we say, no, this is ASEAN's position. When they were pushing the Indo-Pacific, first by Japan, then the US, which we all knew to be a code word to exclude China, include India, exclude China. All of us in ASEAN knew this is not good for us. So ASEAN put up a position, ASEAN's view of the Indo-Pacific, which includes both India and China. The US doesn't like it. Japan doesn't like it. But we like it because it's in our own interest. So on other issues, like BRICS, like Quad, it's difficult, I know. But we should try, whenever possible, to create an ASEAN position reflecting ASEAN's core interests. And ASEAN's core interests are not entirely selfish. ASEAN's core interests reflect the core interests of smaller countries all over the world who do not want to be forced into a choice between black and white, who operate in different shades of gray. Most importantly, who want to be themselves and not lose their own identity just because they are small. So the work of creating, strengthening ASEAN is not a political choice. It is political necessity. It's life and death. If ASEAN is strong, our life chances, whatever happens between the US and China, between China and India, will be okay. If ASEAN is divided and one country supports one side and not the other, then the other will find its own client states in ASEAN. then we'll become balkanized. Balkanized. Where did that word come from? That word came from the Balkans, where between Europe and the Ottomans, between the Catholic world and the Orthodox world, societies there have been fragmented and constantly embroiled in all kinds of tectonic conflicts in that part of the world. It was from there that the First World War began. Until today, the Balkans remain a very fractured part of the world. During the Indochina War, Southeast Asia was fractured along the Mekong. That is past. We must never allow that to happen again. And to build that kind of ASEAN, which will help us to survive and prosper in a multipolar world, we need, at one level, leaders who see beyond their own country. That, no, I cannot just worry for the interests of Singapore or Cambodia or Malaysia. I must be mindful of my neighbors. We also need, from the bottom up, among young people, among artists, athletes, officials, business people, a sense that we are part of Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia did not come about because of ASEAN. Southeast Asia has always been between two great civilizational areas of China, of India. Southeast Asia is where the winds turn, the monsoons. Half the year, the people, the ships, the cargo, the influences come from one side. The other half of the year, it comes from the other side. In the 7th century, there was a Chinese monk called Yi Jing. He was traveling to Nalanda University. On the way, he stopped by in Sumatra to learn Sanskrit. Then he crossed into the Bay of Bengal. He spent many years in Nalanda. On the way back, he stopped in Sumatra to translate the sutras into Chinese. He used up all his paper. So he needed to get more paper and ink from Guangzhou. He went on board a Persian ship and told the ship captain, please go to Guangzhou, get me so much paper and ink. Suddenly the wind blew. And the ship captain said, sorry, we have to sail now. Because when the winds blow, you must sail because you must arrive before the wind stops blowing. So, okay, so after 2 months, he was in Guangzhou. He bought his paper and ink. Then at the next monsoon, he went back to Sumatra. He finished his work. And then 2 years later, he went back to Guangzhou and eventually to Chang'an, today's Xi'an. So this wind, the monsoon, they are part of all our lives in Southeast Asia. For harvest, for navigation. And the result is, our beliefs are mixed. Our cultures are mixed. Our cuisines are mixed. Our genes are mixed. And this is Southeast Asia, which explains why we are so open to the whole world. Intermarriages, syncretism in our religious beliefs, our food, the use of fermented shrimp, fermented fish, all over Southeast Asia, giving us yummy flavors, rice, durians. So ASEAN is not a political project. ASEAN is a political project built upon a common historical, cultural inheritance, which means that the basis of ASEAN is in all of us. When the French and the British and the Dutch were here, they forced us to turn towards London, Paris, Amsterdam. They have gone. We're rediscovering one another, and we're meeting one another, and rediscovering that, yeah, we are relatives. We are connected. We are comfortable with one another. So this ASEAN project is not only a project for leaders and ministers. It's a project for all of us, in whatever field we are in. and certainly for the students of this great university. I've been long promoting that after our national anthem, we should also sing the ASEAN anthem. Now, many of you do not know there is an ASEAN anthem. There is an ASEAN anthem. When I was a foreign minister, I watched YouTube and I committed it to memory and I could sing it, but I've since forgotten it because no one sings it. I tried to persuade the Singapore Education Ministry to promote it among Singapore students. Unfortunately, I failed. I hope in Cambodia you will lead us all by teaching your students, and then the other countries seeing how your students can sing the ASEAN anthem will also teach their own to do the same. To teach the students, we ourselves must sing it. Then they will sing it. If we don't sing it, they will not sing it. But this is one of the failures of my life, which I hope will eventually be put right at some point in time. But in the end, it is not a laughing matter. In the end, it is very important. Then, whatever happens, we will find opportunities. You take, say, the tension between the US and China today. Chinese companies, Japanese companies, American companies, many of them are thinking of pulling out of China. They can't fully because manufacturing is centered in China. Now, what they can pull out, they pull out. Where do they go to? They come to Southeast Asia. Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia. When I was still in carrier logistics, a few years ago, there were so many inquiries by Chinese companies to become Cambodian, to make refrigerators, hair dryers, all kinds of little things, and say, made in Cambodia. So don't give me trouble when I export to the US. But actually, they are Chinese technology, it's low technology, maybe Chinese capital, but now Cambodian. You know, if you go to Florence, outside Florence, there's a town called Prata. In Prata, there must be 200,000 Chinese. They're Italians, some of them are Catholics. They make handbags, neckties. So when you say made in Italy, it could be made by Chinese people in Italy. It doesn't matter. The Chinese are practical people. Many of them are Africans now. So here in Southeast Asia, when the big pieces shift, some areas close, others area open. When they say, oh, decouple technology. So I just read in the Straits Times, Singapore Straits Times, NVIDIA, which makes the GPU chips, and the best are being denied to China because it's important for AI. Now the CEOs in Singapore to talk about investing in Singapore. So Singapore said, well, this is an opportunity for Singapore, which wants to develop AI. But we have to be careful because this cannot be a way of circumventing US sanctions. Then the US will give us trouble. But trouble can be an opportunity for us. You have opportunities. Malaysia will have opportunities. Thailand will have opportunities. We cannot keep out China because China is too big. China is now our biggest trading partner for everybody. And this year, bilateral trade between China and ASEAN will reach $1 trillion. Bigger than China-US trade, bigger than China-Europe trade, bigger than US-Europe trade. And it will continue to diverge. So we need to have good relations with China. When they so send tourists to Cambodia, we have to think why. Is it because of some movie or because of some trouble? Is it because they don't want Chinese people to leave China? We can't affect the way they think, not very much, but we must understand why. When the Americans insist that in Ream there is a naval base for the Chinese, even though you open it up and show it to them, why? Is it because they don't see what we see? Or is it because they're playing a game with us? So as small countries, our senses must be up. We know that we are playing with big forces. These big forces can harm us, can benefit us. If we in ASEAN stick together, and we adjust to changing correlation of forces in the world, I think we will do well. And there's a good chance, in my view, that there'll be peace in the region for another generation. The greatest danger of war in our region is between the US and China. The big issue is Taiwan. China will go to war over Taiwan. The US knows that. So whether there's a war over Taiwan depends on the US, because the US knows where the red line is. If they play the red line, tension goes up. If they move away from the red line, tension comes down. They say Xi Jinping wants to invade Taiwan by 2027. I don't believe that. In 2015, Xi Jinping met Ma Ying-jeou, the president of Taiwan, in Singapore as an equal. And each addressed the other in a very classical Chinese way of Sensheng, which is Qingsei in Japanese, which is a form of address transcending politics. They had dinner together at Shangri-La. The bill was split 50-50. Ma Ying-jeou was stepping down. Xi Jinping made that move for Tsai Ing-wen, that we can also deal with each other as equals, provided we agree that we belong to one family. Tsai Ing-wen was not prepared to do it because her party political platform is for an independent Republic of Taiwan. But that road is still there. And China's preference is, of course, for peaceful unification. So whether or not there's war over Taiwan depends really on the US. But right now, the US is so embroiled in Ukraine, in the Middle East. I don't think it's got bandwidth to start another front in Asia. So if China has another 5 to 10 years, I think it will be very difficult for the US to think of a war with China. And I don't think China wants war, which means that there's a good chance in your lifetime that there'll be continuing peace in the region, and therefore the prospect of continuing development and of Cambodia becoming a first world country within a generation or two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable George Yeo, for such an insightful and enlightening lecture. Now I'd like to invite Associate Professor Nat Chandadat to the stage to moderate the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable George Yu, for insightful lecture. And it opens for the greatest opportunities for dialogue with our participants. Now, before we start the discussion, I would like to lay two basic rules for our questioners during the moderations of this lecture. First, before asking questions, please identify yourself. Introducing yourself, stating your name and your relevant affiliation. Rule number 2, the question must be concise and focused questions. Ask the questions that are clear, concise, and directly related to the topic at hand. Please, okay, I open the floor for the questions.
Thank you so much, former Minister Yeo, for your insightful presentation, and thanks the IISPP for organizing this event. And I have to say that I need to violate your rule a bit. And the reason is this: I'm standing here as a proud person because I came to school here for my BA, and I also used to teach here as well. So my question is, in this multipolar world, you have a lot of pushing and pulling factors simultaneously going on. Look for an example of, let's say, India, the Indo-Pacific strategy. All major powers in regions has their strategy. Right? They come over Southeast Asia like an octopus. In your view, in all of those, so Indo-Pacific strategy mention ASEAN centrality. Are they sincere, and which one should ASEAN trust?
You mean among? Yes, President. You mean among the big powers? Oh, I think it is not a static position. From time to time, a different one would be a problem for us. So we have to adjust and be very practical to know that if any one major power pushes us too hard, then we will lean in the direction of its rivals. Then he, realizing that, will let off. When he does, we also let off and refine our centered position. I don't think anyone will be a fixed problem. I think all of them are potential problems. It can be China, it can be the US, it can be Europe, it may even be India. But manage them. And ASEAN as a grouping is big enough for them not to be able to ignore us. More importantly, we must make ourselves useful to them. You take, say, the ASEAN Regional Forum. ASEAN Regional Forum is where North and South Koreans, Japanese and Koreans, Japanese and Russians, Chinese and Americans sit around the same table. They may not like each other, but we make them behave politely to one another. This is ASEAN's way. This morning when I called on Samdech Hun Sen, he recalled how Japan, Korea, and China used not to be able to meet on their own, but always use an ASEAN meeting where they had to be present to meet on the sideline. When Trump and Kim Jong-un met twice, both occasions were in Southeast Asia. So this is the ASEAN house. It is open on all sides. Please come in. We provide tables, chairs, and refreshments. We welcome you here. Please don't quarrel in our house. And then we wish you well. And if you want us to participate, we'll participate. If you want us to move to the side while you have a discussion, we'll move to the side and play some music for you. This is the ASEAN way. And if we have this wisdom and this discipline, I think everyone will find it in his interest to wish us well. Because if you think about it, we are irreplaceable in the region. No one else can perform this function of providing a neutral, open platform for everybody else.
Thank you. We would like to open. Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the opportunity for giving me to asking the questions. My name is Limuni Panjapo. I'm currently a year 4 student from Department of International Relations. And I have one question. As we can see that in this area of multipolar world, so how can the small states or small country they can use or leverage their unique and strengths such as like the reach of natural resources to gain the opportunity as well as the comparative advantage in this area? Thank you.
You know, people in leadership positions in politics, officials, they may have a rough idea of what the comparative advantages are. But it's really the business people with a nose for profit and opportunity who will seek out all these things. And they can be quite unexpected. And when regulators and ministers are sensitive to the needs of businesses, they can then amend regulations, harmonize custom procedures to make this happen. I remember when, as a result of US trade tension, in our logistics park here in Phnom Penh, the Chinese wanted to build a factory for raisins, which can be spun into fibers for textiles in Myanmar. But when it tried to cross the border, the customs officials looking at these raisins did not know what they were, impounded them. It takes time to explain to customs officials and to amend the regulations to facilitate trade. So if officials and ministers are sensitive to the needs of business, then business will be done and all kinds of unexpected comparative advantages will open up. So this question cannot be answered except in a very abstract way. One of my favorite examples is between China and ASEAN. China is dry, China is cold, China is aging. Southeast Asia is warm, Southeast Asia is wet, Southeast Asia is young. And we are more or less in the same time zone. So because of this, there are a lot of opportunities to do complementary things, including vacations for older Chinese people who want warm weather. So they're happy to come down to Cambodia, they go to Phuket, they go to Bali, the way the Americans go to Florida and to Caribbean and Mexico, the way the Russians go to Turkey. And there'll be tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of Chinese who want warm weather in their cold winters and who want to vacation or even have homes in Southeast Asia. And when they come to Southeast Asia, where do they go to? To Cambodia, to Thailand, to Malaysia? Well, it depends. Depends on whether they're welcome, whether they can buy properties, whether they feel safe, whether they have the food that they would like, whether the services are adequate, whether the payment systems allow them all the conveniences. So in a sense, yes, we have the opportunities, but each country, each company must compete for it by facilitating travel, movement, and by benefiting the customer. So at the abstract level, yes, we must make this work, but give plenty of room for business people to seek out the actual advantages and make money. Oh, Deputy Prime Minister.
First of all, once again, welcome, Dr. Giorgio, Honorable Giorgio. I've been following up on your statement, your article, and sometimes, your books. And I'm one of your fans, actually. And it's my first time to be able to interact with you in person like this. So that's why I had to take this opportunity to ask some questions to you. And I would start with the topics of our discussion today. You talk about threat and opportunities for small states in a multipolar world. But there are always threat and opportunities even in the monopolar world or bipolar world. So my questions, there are more threat or less threat? More opportunities or less opportunity compared to the monopolar world or bipolar world that we has had, in the past, in the case of multipolar world? This is my question to you. And what would be the distinctive opportunity for small countries in the new context? That's related questions. The second question talk about the need for the small country to get together to defend their interests, to reposition themselves, against the big players. So my questions, whether it's gonna be working when you get together as small states, to defend your interests against the big players, because small states tend to be, even weaker when they get together. Sometimes, I refer to you also in case of ASEAN. You can talk about the strength of ASEAN, but at the same time, there's also weaknesses of ASEAN. You know why all the big players come to talk to ASEAN? I learned from you, because it's weak. It poses no threat to any other countries. That's why all players are come to ASEAN, because not just because of its neutrality, but because it's weak in no influence, no weight, no power to impact, to affect other countries, other players. That's a good point I made from your, I think, statements. So this could be the one option, that small countries get together. But on the other hand, there are also theory that, as small country, you have to position yourself to make the strategic alliance with a big country. And then the rest you will deal with other to defend your long-term interests. Like Taiwan, for instance, like South Korea, they did it before. So the second question. And the third question I will have is about the case that the scenario that you talked about. Southeast Asia would have a problem in terms of securing peace if China and US clash or having war. So if the scenario materialized, what would be the effect of that war between the US and China on Southeast Asia, economically and the others, especially economically and politically? So 3 questions. I'm sorry for a big number of questions, but anyway, I had to take opportunity of you being here to ask these questions. Thank you.
Deputy Prime Minister, thank you for honoring me by your presence and by your questions. The threats and opportunities are two sides of the same coin. I'm a bit of a philosophical Taoist, yin yang, that everything has two sides. Yes, there are new threats because of emerging new poles, but there are also new opportunities. And because I see the chances of a war between the US and China reducing in the short term, I feel more optimistic, because in another 5 to 10 years, it's harder for the Americans to have a war with China with an assurance of victory. Right now, they have overwhelming nuclear advantage. And in the South China Sea, and which is one reason why the Americans are so interested in the South China Sea, they try to track every Chinese strategic submarine, which is China's only assured counter-strike capability against the first strike by the US. China has decided, you can sink all my submarines, but I will have 2,000 warheads, and enough will destroy all your major cities. And in China, they're building bunkers and tunnels everywhere, so that if there is a nuclear exchange, enough Chinese will survive. So because it's such a vast country, when they think of defense, it is a very serious exercise. If you've been to the Great Wall of China, and you see the wall from horizon to horizon and beyond, some of them on almost cliff faces, what drove them into this stupendous effort? And it was not just the wall, it was a system built on the wall, day and night, 24/7, 365 days a year, of watchtowers. If you are caught sleeping, you'll be executed. Because if you're caught sleeping, that becomes a point of vulnerability. And if you're corrupt, you will also be executed. So they have a system not only of surveillance, of control, spies, in depth. Because if the Mongols break through, then a huge population will suffer, and will suffer a very long time. So they take defense extremely seriously. So when they look at the US, they are taking no chances. They say, okay, if we have a war, let us say there's a nuclear exchange, what do we do? They know that if they are prepared and will survive, then there'll be no war. But if they are not prepared and may not survive, then the chances of war will be higher. So because of this, in my view, in another 5, 10, 15 years, the chances of a big clash between the US and China will come down. Because the US now has an apparent superiority. In 10 years' time, not so sure. In the meantime, China is changing, the US is changing. Both have problems. Who has the greater problem in time? So for this reason, even though there are two sides of the same coin, I think the opportunities are greater for the time being. Later on, we cannot be sure. Then within ASEAN, there are big countries and small countries. I mean, we have Brunei, we have Singapore, we have Laos, Cambodia. We do not want to be dominated by Vietnam or by Thailand or by Indonesia. So if we, as smaller countries in ASEAN, don't have an instinct to talk to one another, after a while, what Jakarta says or Hanoi says or Bangkok say will be what we have to accept. And we don't want that. We want to be heard. It's not that we want to oppose them, but we want it to be a fair deal for all of us. And that we must have a right to be heard and for our interests to be taken into account. That's why Singapore has very close links with Brunei. And that's why when we come to Cambodia, we feel an automatic kindred spirit. And that's why between Laos and Cambodia, automatically you feel close to one another for this reason. Yeah. So, yes, worldwide, there's this dynamic. Within ASEAN, there's the same dynamic. Then the third question is, what if the worst comes to the worst and there is war between the US and China? What do we do? Now, Singapore is arguably the closest to the US. When the Philippine government asked the US to leave Clark and Subic, Lee Kuan Yew told the US that US airplanes and ships can use our bases. I was a young minister. He says, George, make the announcement in Parliament. He was testing me. So I made the announcement. There was a small debate. First the survey team, and then a year later, the actual agreement. But I always remember what Lee Kuan Yew told us, that if there's war between the US and China over Taiwan, we will not get involved. Now, I do not know whether the policy has changed since I left government 12 years ago. I don't believe it has changed, because why should we want to take sides? No one in Southeast Asia wants to take sides. All of us have a one-China policy. All of us do not play games over Taiwan. And if there's a big fight between them, right now the Americans are using surveillance planes and ships operating out of Singapore. But I don't believe that we will allow Singapore to be used against China the way B-52 bombers could take off from Utapao, Clark and Subic during the Vietnam War. And I don't believe that Vietnam will agree. I don't think the Philippines will agree. See? So therefore, if there's a war between ASEAN, I believe very strongly that ASEAN will stay neutral.
Excellency, also to that, please.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. My name is Pu Sutirak. I'm now a retired academic and former Cambodian ambassador to Japan. It is really an honor for this audience, including myself, to listen to your eloquent expose with regard to the threat and opportunity that the multipolar world bring about. You walk us through from how the small country look at the big guy and how the big guy look at the small country. I have two questions. The first, with regard to uh, the threat to the whole world, actually, when U.S. and China go to war, and you coin Taiwan as a case. But I also want to perhaps challenge your view a little bit. The more dangerous the threat between U.S. and China will erupt when Ukraine is out of the control. That is to say, Russia might use a nuclear weapon, and this is when things go, peace will derail. Everybody, NATO, everybody else will be affected. So I want to hear your view about this possibility. Is it real? They say the Cold War started again, but this time is more lethal, more potent because nuclear weapon will be used. The second question with regard to ASEAN, you eloquently explained to all of us that for small state we need to bang behind ASEAN, ensure that ASEAN centrality is in. We always in the driver's seat, but mind yourself, the passenger always tell us where to go, and they the one who pay the bill. And that a little bit difficult. So I want to ask you, we under threat all the time to choose side between U.S. and China. Even Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong often said that if we choose side, we finish. I want to ask you, did the Chinese pressure ASEAN to choose side? Did the U.S. pressure us to choose side, us meaning ASEAN? Or is it ASEAN themselves feel that we have a nightmare somewhere that we under the pressure to choose side between the U.S. and China? And then my last point about the decline of the multilateral system. I think the multipolar world, the best way to shield the threat is to make sure that the so-called rule-based order by the American coined it after World War, that the liberal world order based on international relation have to be the American led, that we all know. But President Xi Jinping, and you allude to it, there's a Chinese system called Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristic, and there's such thing as GDI, GSI. The Chinese also roll out a few security framework. I would also want to hear your view. Thank you.
The Ukraine war is not going well for NATO. There was a lot of hope put on the offensive this year. It's been completely blunted. Ukraine lost a frightful number of young men trying to advance forward, but they met minefields. They were attacked by the tanks were destroyed by drones and other weapons. And in fact, now the Western countries are looking for a way out and putting increasing pressure on Zelensky to negotiate. So the danger of a nuclear exchange arising out of Ukraine, I think, has greatly receded. It was only in play when Ukraine was making advances and NATO was piling weapon systems and Russia itself felt threatened. So Putin said, if Russia itself is threatened, then we may have to use extraordinary means. So I think that has receded. Your second question was, sorry.
Choosing side for us.
Whether
the U.S.
I mean, you take, say, the Ream naval base. The U.S. has bases all over the world. It makes use of Singapore, it's in the Philippines. So why should Cambodia not be allowed to host foreign bases when other countries are allowed to host foreign bases. But the US is no. Because we are the US, we are special. And so you feel the pressure. All of us were demarched by the US on Huawei, and 5G. And some make some accommodations, but up to a point. But no one took an Australian or European position. The US has come to the conclusion that if it presses ASEAN countries too hard, there may be a bad reaction. So now publicly they say they're not pressuring anybody. But privately, they continue to pressure us on different things. And well, we just have to decide what is our own core position and stick to that. If we can make small accommodations, why not? But if it's a core position, then better not. Because once we give in to the US, next time round, when the Chinese come along, we'll be pressured again. So stick to one position. If we have to pay the price, pay the price. I remember in 1994, there were a group of young international students who were convicted for vandalism, which in Singapore would earn them some strokes out of 10. And one of them was an American youth called Michael Fay, and he was given 6 strokes. So the American government, President Clinton, objected. In the end, we say, okay, we reduce the number of strokes from 6 to 4. And all the others convicted with him also had 1/3 remission. But we had to cane him. And for 3 years, Goh Chok Tong was not invited to the White House. And we faced a lot of problems from Americans. We did not realize at the time that by doing that, other countries' respect for us went up. One Indian diplomat told one of my colleagues, if this had happened in India, we would have just hushed it up and sent the kid home. The Indians were surprised that we carried through. When I went to China, when I went to my ancestral village near Swatao, we were praised to the skies that we dared to cane an American backside. They were shocked that they were prepared to do that. Now, we did it not out of pleasure, because this is our law. We cane our own backsides. So, in dealing with the great powers, we have a core position. Yes, we can make some accommodation, but don't lose that core position. If you lose that core position, there is no position left. Then the last question.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Could I, because we have only 10 more minutes, could I, yes, this question from the students, please. Yeah, at the back, please.
Hello. I am Pikinal. I'm a master student from Institute for International Study and Public Policy. Actually, I'm very thankful for you giving me opportunity for asking the question. Actually, we are living with threat and challenge now, and most countries try to hedge with the two superpower, U.S. and China, and also each state in the region also try to hedge with the two superpower. And my question is that when each nation in the ASEAN region try to hedge, for example, like Vietnamese government, they try to align themselves with the U.S. government for the benefit of economic development and military strengthening. And like Singaporean government, they hedge with the Chinese government for economic development and hedging with U.S. government for military strengthening. So, do you think that what is the future of the ASEAN community? Will it be a stronger or weaker community? Yeah, thank you.
Talking about the hedging strategy of the small countries. We take the case of the Singaporean hedging China for economic development. And we ask whether in the future the small country and ASEAN will become more stronger in their alliance against the superpower?
Well, as small countries, we can play a hedging strategy, but never forget that hedging strategies are risky. And you know, it's like the banks asking you, what is your risk tolerance? So if you take too much risk and the risk turn against you, your backside may be burned. So depending on your own capability, be measured about the risk you take. Small countries should not take excessive risks. And don't take excessive risks with the people's money, with the people's livelihood. If it's your own money, well, good luck to you. If it's your own life, good luck to you. But we are responsible for many lives and for their welfare. Don't take excessive risks. So the hedging strategy is then different. Of course, China is important because China is a very important market, it's an important source of investments, and will be an important source of infrastructure. And no one will want to turn away China. But the more we depend on China, the more worried we are that we become too dependent on China. Therefore, we want diversification. My message to my American friends is this: the more you push, the less you get. The less you push, the more you get. Because if you don't push, everyone wants you around. Because everybody finds their China account growing and therefore wants you for diversification. So if you're on the Belt and Road, which is very good because China is paying for a lot of it, and your economy grows, you want the US in your economy too. And the Americans do not have to pay 1 cent for the infrastructure, but they will benefit from the infrastructure. But if the objective is to keep down China because of some sense that China threatens their preeminence, then there's a different game. So my view is, in a multipolar world, the US will remain primus inter pares, the first among equals, because they are the ones closest to all the other poles. If they play it skillfully, the way Henry Kissinger recommended, in every part of the world, they can be the decisive weight. But it means not pursuing your own view of everything, but by applying your influence at a balance so that the outcome is more advantageous to you. So a more modest view is a more productive position for the US to take. After a period of trial and maybe disappointment, the US will eventually come to the position that their best position is to be the first among equals and not to be the first.
Thank you. Given the interest of time, I think we can have 2 more questions, but Excellency Pu, could you just wait? Because the participant, the majority of the participants are students, so I a bit biased toward the students. One at the back from the, yes, please.
Greeting both honorable. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be standing here and asking questions. So my name is Vathi Sunkanika. I am currently a senior student in the Department of International Studies. I'm concentrating in international economy. So my questions to the honorable is that in the case of smaller countries, let's say developing economies like countries in Southeast Asia, South, we are actually more prone to internal issue or domestic issues such as poverty or inequality. So do you think that these issues can actually pose us a challenge to smaller countries in terms of maintaining its strategic position in a multipolar world? Because, for example, if a country has a smaller capacity or economy, it can lead to them having less bargaining power and also be more vulnerable to external threat and pressure. So do you think that these can pose as a challenge, and how can we actually navigate through these challenges? Thank you.
Your question is about the relationship between internal challenges and external challenges. The bigger you are, the more your challenges are internal. So whether China rises or falls depend principally on the Chinese. Whether the American dream continues to be bright and sunny or becomes a nightmare depends principally on the Americans. But for small countries, what happens to them will affect us powerfully. And we must understand this, that if internally we are divided, we will not be able to navigate the external challenges. If you're a super tanker, you can fight on board the super tanker. The super tanker will still continue. If you're in a small boat, finding your way in between super tankers, and you're fighting within that small boat, where your chances of survival are very slim. So it's very important that in small countries, that there must be a tight unity. It cannot be by a master whipping slaves. It has to be by a camaraderie that comes from a strong sense of a community with a common destiny. That if there's a bad leader, then we replace the bad leader, but we will still stay united. And do not, in the pursuit of victory in the internal conflict, jeopardize the entire boat. That's the key. It applies as much to Singapore as it does to Cambodia. Without the internal unity, our chances of being able to successfully navigate the ocean would be greatly imperiled. So we are a small country. We must understand this. Our advantage is being able to turn rapidly so that if suddenly there's an iceberg, suddenly there's a possibility of a collision, we can turn away. This is our strength, which is also our weakness. And earlier, Deputy Prime Minister talked about ASEAN's strength, well, ASEAN's weakness being in its strength. We talk about ASEAN centrality, about ASEAN the driver's seat. ASEAN is in the driver's seat not because ASEAN is an F1 driver. It's because we are wearing thick glasses, our hearing is not very good, we're a bit clumsy. So all the others say, yeah, it's okay, you be there. Because if you have an F1 driver, the whole car may go in a direction that the others don't want to go. Then everybody's in trouble. See? So understanding our own weaknesses, understanding our own limitation is very important. Have a very high sense of reality and realism.
Thank you. The last question from Excellent Pooh.
I'm very happy to be given finally the microphone. You know, as a retiree, our memory is short. I was trying to remember what is my question. And for keeping for a long time, I almost forget my question. And I'm a retiree also from the UN. I worked in UN for 20 years and also retired from RUPP recently. My question to you is that, no, first of all, I really like to mention that Giorgio is my heroes. Like Deputy Prime Minister, I always follow you. Everything I spend night on a YouTube, looking at what you say. I almost know everything what you say, but still want to ask a question that no one want to say yet about the technicalities, about threat, opportunities, small country, big country. We could talk, but I want to ask from different angle. Ask about you, not about other people. About you. To me, you are like a model, Asian model. I'm 70 years old. You are 69. I know. And then we live long enough in this region. We used to be very poor, right? Very poor, and then struggle with many problems. And then we look at West as our sensei. You mentioned Japanese teachers, right? We look up. When I studied in Japan, called to develop is westernization, follow like a Western. But now the Western, you say, okay, come to the plateaus, and maybe we go up. How does yourself to share with other colleagues here? how could we Asian behave, keep our attitude, our spiritualities at par with Western, with American? I think this is a bit difficult attitude. I work in the UN myself, I know, because I'm only Asian among 200 people, white people. You feel like oppressed, like, oh no, my English is not so good, it's not big as them, not handsome, so a bit of complex in my mind. So how do you behave in order to deal with this problem? Because you are Catholic, Hindu, Buddhism, so many things. So how do we behave in terms of spirituality in yourself? Thank you.
Oh, Professor Pu, thank you for a very personal question. President Mitterrand of France had an advisor called Jacques Attali, who is a dear friend. And Jacques Attali was his eminence grise, his principal assistant. And Jacques Attali told me that wherever Mitterrand traveled, he always asked for a map with the country he was traveling to at the middle, in the center of the map. In other words, put yourself in the mind and in the shoes of your host, and not at the corner of the map with France in the middle. To me, this is a general philosophy that to be effective, and this is very Buddhist, to be effective is better to have low ego. You're no longer thinking of yourself, but thinking of the person you're interacting with. What is he worried about? What are his challenges? What are his fears? What are his hopes? Then you begin from there, not with yourself. And when you do that, the conversation becomes very free, very relaxed, very productive. But if we begin with ourselves and the center of the map, we are in the side, then the conversation is unproductive, it's probably unpleasant. So for me, from a young age, I had a deep interest in other cultures, and also in my own identity. My view is if you know your identity, you're very relaxed about other people's identities. But if you are insecure by your own identity, you get very nervous when other people have strong identities. You see? So know yourself first, but in the low ego kind of way. Then enjoy the company of others in their identity. And then the world becomes a very colorful, wonderful world. Because we then respect each other for what he is and not for what we want him to be, which is what true love is, I'm told. Accepting the other person for what he is and not for what you want him to be or her to be. Yeah. So in my musings, I come back again and again to this, that all of us can contribute more to the world by having a lower ego state and by accepting, respecting, celebrating the uniqueness of each and every one of us. That each of us is separately created. That each of us is separately accountable to the Almighty. That whether we're young or old, whether we are clever or not so clever, whether we are beautiful or not, each is precious. Each in his own way reflects the Creator. And in seeing the multiple faces of creation, we achieve a certain common humanity. Then we realize that, yeah, we're all part of one field, one system. But thank you for this question. I hope my response is not too abstract. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Giorgio, for, I think we can, one more? Excellent. The last question, please. We're running out of time.
I'm not the last question to ask, but as the one now is very common, because everywhere you go, say comprehensive strategic partnership. Everywhere is comprehensive and comprehensive. So, as to welcome Minister George, we were with you the last 15 years ago. We made, and now in honor of Deputy Prime Minister here, you know, you have all the question around from young to the senior to Deputy Prime Minister, but you need to have one more engagement with the MP. So I am a congressman from Kampong Thom, and I just landed from Vientiane. We had just ended a summit of the CLV, the Cambodian, Vietnam, Laos, the country of the Mekong. So I'm not asking you as a minister, but just like feeling as a Singaporean and as an experienced diplomat. What do you think if ASEAN does not exist tomorrow? What Singapore will take? You will be with the Mekong country, or you will be with United States, or you will be with China? Thank you very much.
Very tough question.
To me, ASEAN is not merely a political project. The ASEAN arises organically from our existence in the region. So I openly proclaim myself to be a Malayan. I consider the people of Malaysia and Singapore to be one people in two countries. Because in a room full of Malaysians and Singaporeans, it's very difficult to distinguish between the Malaysian and the Singaporean. And when we intermarry, there's almost no cultural stress. Then in an ever-widening circle, Indonesia is our other neighbor. Then there's Thailand, there's Cambodia. So ASEAN is built upon this almost a little stupas emerging from each of us and all coming together into a larger stupa, which in this present time we call ASEAN. So to me, ASEAN is not a creation, not only a political creation, it is an organic phenomenon.
Thank you very much, Honorable. As we have to conclude due to the running out of time, I would like to extend our gratitude to all the attendees and participants who have actively engaged in the discussion. Hopefully, in the next opportunity, we will have more time for questions and answer sessions. Your thoughtful questions, contributions have enhanced the depth and breadth of our exploration, fostering truly enriching experience for all involved. As we conclude, let us carry forward the wisdom gained from Honorable George Yo's lecture, recognizing the importance of reality, unity, cooperation, and balanced approach in addressing the threats and seizing the opportunities that lie ahead. Together, we can work towards building a more inclusive, stable, and prosperous future for small countries and the global community as a whole. Once again, our sincere thanks and gratitude to Honorable George Yo for his enlightening lecture and to all of you for your active participation, great contribution. May the knowledge gained today inspire us to strive for greater understanding, collaboration, and resilience in the face of challenge and opportunities of a multipolar world. I would like, thank you very much, and I would like to conclude the Q&A session. Thank you. And I yield the floor to the MC. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
To echo the Associate Professor Dr. Nek Chanadit, I'd like to once again thank you to Honorable George Yeo, as well as the audience for an active engagement in our session. To present the gifts and token of appreciation Excellency, for Honorable George Yeo, I'd like to invite His Excellency Bongsai Bisot, Deputy Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia, to the stage. Please welcome them. I'd like to also invite Honorable George Yeo to the stage as well. Next, I'd like to invite Professor Chechili, Rector of the Royal University of Phnom Penh, to present a token and certificate of appreciation. For a group photo session, I'd like to invite our guest of honor and Professor Chechili to descend the stairs and join our distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen at your seat. B team, please step on stage to take the picture. Everybody, please get ready. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Yes. I'd like to express my